There are many misconceptions about Post-Stalin USSR. We will analyze and debunk them all. In this series, we will discuss many topics, such as state of the whole people, peaceful coexistence, the post-Stalin USSR economy, the fall of the USSR, and many more topics. So if you are interested in post-Stalin USSR, be it as a leftist or just a curious person in general, just lay back and enjoy my video. Debunking Misconceptions about Post-Stalin USSR, Episode 6, Part 3, Leonid Brezhnev's Economic Reforms. Before I start this video, I want to say that this episode is technically divided into 3 parts. The first is about the abolition of the Sovnarkhozy in 1965 and the Lieberman-Kosygin reforms. The second part covers everything from 1966 to 1970, such as real socialism, August, and in large part cyber planning, about how the Lieberman-Kosygin reforms were extended to different sectors of industry, the reform on loans and credit, the reform on loans and credit and stagnation, and more. Before you watch this part, I absolutely advise you to watch part 1 and especially part 2 so you understand this part as well. Also, I want to quickly say that we will go in chronological order, or we'll at least try to go in chronological order as much as possible. So we will start with ASPR and cyber planning after 1970, and we'll stop at the 1979 Kosygin reforms. Many like Mao and Hoxha say that Brezhnev's economic reforms destroyed central planning and established capitalism. Is this true? No, that's wrong, and we will debunk all arguments made by Mao, Hoxha, Descartes, and others against Brezhnev's economic reforms. Now, I seriously advise you to watch part 2 of my Brezhnev's economic reforms episode. The link will be in the description down below, because without watching it, or at least the part about cyber planning and August, you won't understand anything. However, I'll still try to do my best and summarize part 2 as best as I can. So here is a short recap of August and cyber planning in the 1960s. It started in 1960. The industrial control system was implemented in individual enterprises and the car industry. Various departments, ministries, and councils for cyber planning were established, which were part of the state. The industrial control system was successfully implemented in many regions like Rostov, which helped spread it further. It made production more efficient and created huge breakthroughs in technology. By 1970, 400 industrial control systems, aka 400 state institutions for cyber planning existed compared to 3,000 in 1975. August was actually implemented in a very small amount of enterprises. If you were wondering, the industrial control system was implemented in the 1960s and was cyber planning. It's measuring the process of production via cyber planning and input. The received input was then compared to the original planned targets via cyber planning, and finally the industrial control system created commands through measuring the quantity and speed of production via cyber planning. However, the industrial control system itself didn't plan output and didn't give plans via cyber planning to enterprises, so it wasn't exactly the same as August or ASPR. Also, August was an attempt to radically expand the boundaries of the use of the industrial control system into a single network that does cyber planning. It was never fully implemented, but it managed to make some individual enterprises and the car industry be planned via the industrial control system. Now let's move on to ASPR. ASPR was introduced in 1970. Back then the industrial control system was in large part exaggerating from 1970 to 1977, and eventually there were 4,000 industrial control systems by 1975 as noted before. ASPR technically started in 1970 and officially the first phase of it started in 1977 and ended in 1985, whereas the second phase started in 1985 and ended in the year, or should have ended in the year 2000. So by the year 2000, August, ASPR, and full on cyber planning would have been implemented. We will first talk about ASPR's first phase and ASPR before 1977 and about what ASPR even is. Later we will talk about its second phase. Now let's read about ASPR. So I outlined the idea in a nutshell, which is a nationwide computer system that serves as the basis for radically improving the quality of planning. And now we finally move on to ASPR. Essentially, the history of ASPR begins in 1965 or in 1966, when a group was created in the depths of Gosplan to study the design of ASPR. And here I probably want to somehow return from oblivion to two names that are generally responsible for the implementation of this project. Lebedynsky became the chief designer of Aspar and Bezrukov was its deputy. If Lebedynsky, he grew up in Gosplan, was a planner, then Bezrukov started as a radio engineer, and then gradually these competencies in economics in himself increased. Aspar is the core of Ogas. Therefore, what I'm telling you is that the treachery of the Gosplan decided to build Ogas in a roundabout way. And the availability of practical results allowed them to initiate the development of the degree on Aspar in 1972. Here I have it highlighted in red. So there is a degree of the State Planning Committee on the creation of automated systems for plant calculations. In 1974, the method recommendations of the Gosplan for drawing up plans gets published. The first phase of Aspar was introduced in 1977, the second phase was introduced in 1985. This is important because by the beginning of Perestroika, the second phase of the Aspar was fully operational. A distinctive feature of the second phase of Aspar was the so-called central set of tasks. To summarize all this, the concept of Aspar started when a group in the Gosplan studied it. Its initiators were Lebedynsky and Bezrukov. The development of Aspar in practice started in around 1970 or 1972. Aspar is the core of Ogas and is the automation of plant calculations and plant output. During the second phase of Aspar was fully operational, and it's also planning input via automation. Now let's continue reading. Now in order to digitize something, we need to first study this matter, and the task is to create a system that will be gradually introduced in stages, aka phases. Therefore the Aspar unit was a separate plant calculation. This was the time when the topic of operations research was very popular, and in general it was assumed that the Ogas smoothly decomposes all the work of the Gosplan, any part of the work, in accordance with cybernetic principles, into the flow of incoming information with which something happens and the flow of outgoing information. A separate planner is sitting. He receives two forms. Each of them contains two numbers. He multiplies them one by one, writes to the third form, and we already have something to automate. We have input information, two forms, some kind of transformation and output information. At the start we can transfer only this one base here to a computer, and just like that we will have the input information that we already had. The output information can be printed, and if in the next iteration there is a living man sitting, then he can place these printouts as well. They will not differ in any way from this that Ivan Vasilievich brought to him by hand yesterday, and today we print them out. Then, when we will understand how the neighboring calculations done, then we can also automate the neighboring calculation. And so our system starts to grow gradually. This gradual growth is very important because it solves the problem of how to actually create an information planning system in the size of an entire country, because this unit of calculation can be done at any time by either a computer or a person with accounts. And so it was very important to explain to the planners that we will not do this for you, but we will help you, we will save you from this routine work, and this is not some kind of parallel system that we do, and that then you come to work and we say thank you, we don't need you anymore, but this is actually your planning, just now translated on a computer basis. And the first thing that the developers of Aspar encountered was that they stupidly followed each planner and wrote down what he was doing and drew information flows. Here is this crazy number of arrows and squares which just characterizes the flow of information in the preparation of one of the sections of the plan. That's what I'm saying, that then each of these squares can be slowly automated, gradually increasing the complexity of the system. In other words, some indicators were counted, and some indicators, well, here are called skill of a planned employee. What they said was, how do you replace us? How do you algorithmize us? How do you algorithmize it? And these are completely non-formalizable things. At first, the main computer center of the State Planning Committee of the USSR had to chase planners and say, give us a job. Don't think that everyone was so backward back then. The main computer center of the State Planning Committee of the USSR had a marketing department in its own computer center, and there was a department for the implementation of computer technology in the Gosplan, which in fact was also a marketing department. After all, all. These are people who went to other departments, recognized their pain, and then said, listen, we have cool computers in the computer center, and there are programs who can turn your pain into a program. This is what you count for 2 months will count for you in one night. Let's conclude a contract and your pain will decrease dramatically. But this department was made in 1964, and in the year 1971 this department was already eliminated because the Gosplan tried out the computer chip, and the main computer center of the State Planning Committee of the USSR began working in 3 shifts. The computer can work around the clock. Moreover, it was better not to turn off the computers of those times. On the contrary, this is why the marketing department was removed for being unnecessary, because now the planets were hammering at the main computer center of the State Planning Committee of the USSR and were saying, we still have something to count for you. We still need you to count here, please. This is the number of planned tasks. This is not a single calculation. These are types of tasks. In other words, these are the types of tasks that were able to count in the main computer center of the State Planning Committee of the USSR. Exponential growth of various types of calculations. Unfortunately, but maybe not unfortunately, because it made life much easier for planners. 75 to 80% of all calculations were what is called direct account tasks. This is what is currently being done in Excel and the summation function. There is stretching that is just received, I don't know, 15,000 requests for materials. So then you need to find out the general demand for materials of this type. Previously you were sitting in a column, summed up 15,000 applications, and now you just click on a button and there you go, the computer sums up everything for you. And about 20 to 25% of them were optimization tasks. In other words, this is exactly what computers have been campaigning for since computers appeared. ASPER was introduced in stages, and ASPER, aka OGAS, is basically measuring the flow of output and input information and counting/calculating other indicators. An ASPER unit is a separate planned calculation. Calculations input and output could be automated on computers, and this could be done by several people together by sharing a single network that does cyber planning, which stretches all over the USSR. ASPER and OGAS didn't mean that computers would independently manage the economy. People would still control the computers, and this was far more efficient, as now calculations that took 2 months could be done overnight. To take the Cyberpunk's quest and arrows as an example, this made planning faster than before. As noted before, departments for cyberplanning were also established. 75 to 85% of all planned tasks were done and calculated in the main computer center of the State Planning Committee of the USSR. The general demand for products was calculated quickly by computers via getting requests for goods and materials and turning them into plans. Also, 20 to 25% of the cyber planned tasks were tasks that sought to make enterprises implement plans the most efficient way possible without wasting many resources. Let's move on. In other words, Comrade Baibakov came and said that we have saved many millions of rubles thanks to computers, but our computers are working slowly because we need to manually enter data that comes to us from the Central Statistical Directorate. But if we have established a direct exchange of information with the Central Statistical Directorate, we would work even better. There was nothing to hide this, so from the moment when the Gosplan had real results, the Gosplan started hammering everyone else to still come out to combine all the industry systems into this single super system, what Glushkov dreamed of 15 years ago. Despite the fact that these stories are not very well known right now, back then the computer center was a PR object. All foreigners were taken there with pleasure, showing the power of Soviet cybernetics and Soviet planned science. I have a good photo here. Here they stand next to each other. Castro is well recognized by his beard. On one side stands Baibakov and on the other side Lebedynsky. They show him that in the Soviet Union we are making plans via signs, and this is actually the interior of the main computer center of the State Planning Committee of the USSR. One of the gyms too means someone shows all the Soviet computers. There isn't much to say here. Asper and cyberplanning were really efficient and saved the USSR lots of money. Asper created direct exchange of information with the Central Statistical Directorate. The Gosplan combined all the industrial control systems, all the calculation units, and all the cyberplanned industrial systems into one network, as this was part of Asper and OGAS. The main computer center of the State Planning Committee of the USSR was a PR project. PR object, and foreigners were fascinated by Soviet cyberplanning, Asper and its computers such as Fidel Castro. Okay, now let's continue with the second phase of Asper. Because in the first phase of Asper, we did what was easier, that is this beautiful picture with squares that I showed you. We automated what we could, and during the second phase of Asper, we put together a single system from this vinaigrette. The central set of tasks combined basically almost all the main tasks necessary for drawing up comprehensive plans for national economic development. These were balance sheet calculations, calculations of inter-industry balance, indicators of living standards, retail turnover, foreign trade, financial and economic indicators, monitoring of industrial production plans, and their availability of material resources. That is, by 1985, in the Gosplan there was a model created of the Soviet economy that could actually recalculate the entire system of plans in real time if any of the indicators changed. In other words, we could bring in a balance system, change something in it, and see how this one change will affect the rest of the economy. The second distinctive feature of the second phase of Asper was the distribution of mini computers. Iskra 226, Iskra 226, which began to be put on the table just for plant employees. It was immediately followed by a package of planned programs which allowed us to start replicating. In other words, Asper was distributed to the regional Gosplans. I remind you that the Gosplan of the USSR did not work alone, it had its own Gosplans in each republic, so they were delivered to the planning bodies of ministries and departments, and all this was connected by a network. In other words, a system of cloud storage of information with remote access was created for 1985. What this system could do. For the plan for 1986, calculations were made on the need for material and technical resources for capital construction, based on direct data processing for all construction projects in the country. That is, these ancient clumsy Soviet computers managed to calculate the need for materials for 150,000 construction projects in the country, consolidated department rules and regulations via this terminal network, coordinated 25 sections of the Gosplan, the work of the main computer center of the State Planning Committee of the USSR, the ministries and departments of the Gosplans of the Union Republics according to the plan, and the plan for the 12th five-year plan of 1986 to 1990 was ready in 5 variations and in this form submitted to the government. This system allows you to provide a real-time recalculation of the entire system of plans when some individual indicators change. That is, if we change something in a voluntary way, we can immediately understand. Well, not immediately, there is a night to wait, but we can still understand how it affects the rest of the economy. That is, as it were, Comrade Glushkov's dream, which turns out to be almost fulfilled. In the first phase of Asper, the USSR automated what it called input, output, calculations, plans, indicators of living standards, and more, but the second phase of Asper created a single network from all these automations from which they were implemented. By 1985, in the Gosplan there was a model that created plans, then allowed the computers to change them a little bit and then see the results of the change. Replications of plans also started in the second phase, and mini computers called Iskra 226 were distributed. Asper was also distributed to regional Gosplans. It's like how the economy was planned before, like under Stalin even, but now on computers. The regional cyberplanned Gosplans could also create plans and then send them to ministries, the Gosplan and state departments for approval. They send them through a digital network. For 1985, there was a cloud storage of information system with a digital network, which through department rules and regulations united 25 sections of the Gosplan, the main computer center of the State Planning Committee of the USSR, the ministries and departments of the regional Gosplans, according to several plans under a single digital network. For the plan of 1986, calculations were made based on the demand and need for materials, resources, and goods for 150,000 construction projects based on direct data processing, aka server plant input. The server plant ASPER system created plans that allowed the computers to change them a little bit and then see the results of the change. This all means that Glushkov's dream, the dream of the initiator of gas, was almost fulfilled. Okay, now let's continue reading. Almost because information from other systems is partially transmitted via communication channels, that is by via and partially on machine media, that is, a man comes with the real and this real must then be put. And after finishing work on the second phase of ASPER, the main directions for further development of the ASPER were developed, and where it was recorded that by 2000 we will unite the ASPER channels with direct data transmission channels with all other departmental information systems, completing the creation of our gas. For the 12th five-year plan, worked on the direct transmission of data from systems of ASPER, CSB, ACS of Gosnap of the USSR Ministry of Foreign Trade of the ACS, ACS GKES, ACS of the Ministry, ASU Minelsprom of the USSR. In a nutshell, by the year 2000, full-on server planning, or GAS and ASPER, should have been implemented with a network which unites all, and I mean all ASPER channels with it, creating direct data exchange via uniting the channels with direct data transmission channels and all other departmental information systems. This was actually already done when the USSR existed, but not all ASPER channels were united with direct data transmission channels. ASPER channels, which weren't united with them, were only connected to communication channels. Now, let's take a look at a short summary of what ASPER could do. Okay, so it could create a technical balance and consistency of plans. It could detect errors. It could create variable calculations. It could create a single entry of information, cloud storage with remote access, direct machine-to-machine data exchange, databases like standards and statistics, organization of work on the plan in the system of electronic document circulation. Yeah, also the Gosplan could make plans multivariant. Also, here is the growth of the number of planned tasks of the main computer center of the State Planning Committee of the USSR, which gave planned tasks to the ASPER channels/enterprises. As you can see, back in 1970, when they started ASPER, the main computer center of the State Planning Committee of the USSR created 180 planned tasks, compared to 3,300 in 1979, and then 10,000 just a year later, which is a magnificent increase, and then 30,000 in 1985, by the time the first phase of ASPER ended. Also, I want to address stagnation again. I forgot to mention something about it in part 2. Under the so-called era of stagnation, the USSR was about to surpass the US in terms of industrial output, as Soviet industrial output was making up 55% of US output in 1960 compared to 80% in 1980. To quote an article, during the years of stagnation there was a serious growth of Soviet industry, which in general outstripped the pace of industrial development in the United States during this period. If in 1960 the volume of industrial output was about 55% of the industrial output of the United States, in 1980 it was already more than 80%. Now, I could talk about the abolition of the Lieberman Constitution reforms in 1971, but I won't, as I have already talked about the abolition of them in part 1 and maybe even part 2 of my Brezhnev's economic reforms episode. Make sure to check them out. Part 2 as well. It covers how there was no stagnation under Khrushchev and Brezhnev. Now, let's talk about the 1973 Constitution reforms, to quote 2 books about them. The planning work of the ministries grew progressively more complicated, economic productivity advanced to a higher technical level, and the number of enterprises grew. A new organizational level, the Glavki, or head administrations, was set up in the ministries in the 1950s to take care of the details of planning. The Glavki were revived after the 1965 economic reform and accumulated a number of skillful administrators and planners. The intention of the political leadership in the next major reform was to bring about a radical change in the organization of the economy. The reform ratified in April 1973 abolished the Glavki, which had an extremely important position in the old system, and replaced them with sectoral associations at union and republic levels. The official reason for the reform was to increase concentration and cooperation. Associations of enterprises, объединения, were formed to effect these changes. They were to cooperate in technology, education, etc., and in addition concentrate their activities within more circumscribed areas. The traditional problem of Soviet enterprises had been the excessive number of different items produced. Had the reform been fully implemented, the influence of the ministries would have been substantively weakened. First, they would have lost the Glavki, which employed a large number of persons with expert knowledge. Secondly, the level below the ministerial level would have been strengthened. Merging smaller enterprises into associations would have given them a common spokesman, often with considerable economic expertise. Thus, if the new structure had been fully built up, the position of the central political leadership and of Gosplan would have been strengthened considerably relative to that of the ministries. It is quite plausible that one non-official reason for the reform was to reduce the influence of the ministries, which indeed have often been charged with obstructing change in the Soviet economy. But like most other Soviet reforms, implementation has been slow. New объединения are still being formed even in the 1980s, and the slowness of implementation was commented upon at the time of the 1979 economic reform. As the situation stands, therefore, the 1973 reform has failed to effect a shift of power away from the ministries, and in fact, as becomes clear from the debate in the specialized economic literature in the 1980s, officials at the local and regional levels still find that too much decision-making power is concentrated in the ministries. The 1973 reform provided for a number of ways to reform объединения, including for those involved in material production. One, large enterprises or combines may be transformed directly into associations. Two, a large enterprise may incorporate several smaller enterprises or filiale to form an association. Three, several smaller enterprises may be combined into an association. The other type of associations are administrative associations, and like the ministries and state committees, they may also be organized at several levels. One, all union associations responsible for production within an area of national importance. Two, republic associations dealing with production within a republic and subordinated to a republic ministry or an all union association. Three, local associations responsible for production in a limited geographical area. Industrial associations involved in material production or enterprises of the older type are often subordinated to these administrative associations. Thus, various types of organization are possible depending on the particular sectoral structure, and the following principal types may be distinguished. One, two-level organization. Industrial associations are subordinate to an all-union or republic ministry. Combines and small enterprises may also be directly subordinate to ministries. Two, three-level organization. Industrial associations are subordinate to an all-union concern, which is accountable to an all-union ministry. Alternatively, an industrial association may be subordinate to a republic association or a republic ministry. Combines and enterprises may also be included in this type of organization. The 1973 reform obviously entails an extremely complicated system of organization. Other variations of the two-level, three-level, and perhaps even four-level organization may be introduced, but the old system continues to exist as new associations are established. The 1973 reform entailed a number of major modifications in regional policy. The intention of the reform was to strengthen decision-making at the administrative level under the ministries, and this was in turn to strengthen the influence of the republic and local levels. A number of new associations were also established at the republic level under the republic councils of ministers. However, because of the slowness of implementation of the reforms, these measures have not been significant. The basic unit in the former organizational structure of the Soviet economy was the enterprise, the предприятие. It continued to exist after the 1973 reform, although it is now normally part of the various types of associations. The executive manager of an enterprise is typically in a strong position. Soviet enterprises are managed on the one-person leadership principle, единоличие, in which the executive manager is alone accountable to his superiors. His influence is limited in some areas. For example, the hiring and firing of personnel, where the trade unions are strong. Since 1983, workers' organizations have had broader powers to influence the management of enterprises. Enterprises must follow the plan decided on by the central authorities. They receive information on a number of plan indicators, which aggregatedly describe the enterprise's finished output and are expressed in physical magnitudes, in monetary terms, or as a combination of various other indicators. Soviet planners have found it difficult to find A well-functioning system of indicators, and indeed some of the economic reforms have been exclusively concerned with changes in the indicator system. In the foregoing, I have attempted to provide a frame of reference for the ensuing discussion of the debates and decisions concerning regional policy, which in fact have often touched upon organizational questions. The organizational complexity of the Soviet administrative system is evident enough, and it, together with the obstacles it creates to change, are discussed in Chapter 7. Figure 4.1, taken from a Soviet textbook on Soviet economic planning, gives a general overview of the organization in the Soviet Union without, of course, any claims of completeness. The diagram shows the formal organizational structure, but actual decision-making in planning issues probably takes place primarily at the highest levels. Proposals for change presented by the lower levels usually concern less important aspects of the plan. The party agencies have also been left out of the diagram, although it may be taken as given that the overriding decisions on, for instance, the 5-year plans are taken by the Central Party authorities. The Party Congress ratifies plan proposals, after which formal decisions are taken in the Soviets at various levels. This was a very left-wing reform which made the economy of the Soviet Union even more left-wing and even more centralized. It was not fully implemented. It sought to abolish the Glavki but failed. What were the Glavki? To quote two articles. Glavk, abbreviation for main committee, the name of main departments, main departmental divisions, main ministries, and main central institutions. Now let me show you what its functions were. The question of technical management and planning of production, organization of labor and wages, capital construction and finance, personnel, supply, sales, etc. All this is within the scope of the GLAVK. It is its direct task. The 1973 Kosygin reform sought to abolish the GLAVK and replace them with associations. What are associations? To quote the Great Soviet Encyclopedia. Industrial associations operate on the basis of хозрасчет, provide full reimbursement of production costs, maintenance of the management apparatus, and profit efficiency for accounts with the state budget, and payment of interest for loans and credit, as well for development. Industrial association from the formation of various funds and reserves. The Industrial Association, having economic and operational independence and larger resources, creates good conditions for full хозрасчет. A large industrial association has great opportunities for the rational organization of the production process, supply and sales, and the implementation of a unified technical policy. An industrial association is an important economic link in industry. Its activities are based on a combination of centralized management with economic independence and the initiative of the association. The production association operates in accordance with the regulations on the Industrial Association combine approved by the resolution of the Council of Ministers of the USSR of March 27, 1974. Along with this, an industrial association also sometimes enjoys rights that may be granted to it in accordance with the established procedure by a ministry, department, or Council of Ministers of the Union Republic. A production association may be part of an all-union or Republican one. The management of the Industrial Association is carried out by rule by the management apparatus of the enterprise. The Industrial Association is headed by a general director or a director. As an advisory body to the Industrial Association, there is a council of directors, which includes the heads of all production units, as well as a representative of the relevant trade union body. The chairman of the council is the general director of the association. In the industry of foreign socialist countries, the complexes of the Industrial Association type encompass entire industries and subsectors, and are formed on the principle of technological uniformity of production at a single raw material base or the sequence of the technological process. The most common form of associations, similar to the Soviet Industrial Association, are combined in the GDR and Poland, state economic organizations in Bulgaria and concerns, and combined in Czechoslovakia. On a side note, I don't know how similar these associations were compared to the ones in the GDR, Poland, Bulgaria, and Czechoslovakia, so I can't judge that. But according to the article, at least they were similar, which is vague. I already talked about what хозрасчет, full хозрасчет initiatives, and what profit are in the context in which Soviet leaders talked about in episode 6, part 1, and of course, Soviet economists like Lieberman and Kosygin, so I don't think that it's necessary to discuss this for a billionth time. Just watch episode 6 part 1. Link will be in the description, though I'll address full хозрасчет here as well. So the Great Soviet Encyclopedia says that associations were centrally planned, had economic independence, were managed by the director of the association, and had strict regulations that they had to follow all at the same time. How does that work? well, they didn't really have any economic independence. Everything was done through central planning. However, the associations had a right to independently implement plans that they were given by the state. I mean, this is literally what they were supposed to do. Specifically, the directors of the associations should have independently implemented plans. But if they started to violate plans or just didn't do them, or started to exploit people or something like that, then they were punished. To quote a Soviet book from 1980, expressed by the concept of full хозрасчет, the economic position of the main link of public industries, enterprises, production associations is characterized by property and separate organization necessary for independent participation in commodity turnover. In legal terms, this is expressed in granting a full хозрасчет enterprise the rights of a legal entity and assigning and strengthening state property to it in the form of fixed, current, and special property funds on the right of operational management, establishing its independent responsibility for obligations, etc. This is obvious. Associations could independently implement plans that the state gave. Also, central planning continues to exist and was never destroyed. Let's quote the book that we quoted before again. Enterprises must follow the plan decided on by the central authorities. They receive information on a number of plan indicators, which aggregately describe this enterprise's finished output and are expressed in physical magnitudes, in monetary forms, or a combination of various other indicators. Soviet planners have found it difficult to find a well-functioning system of indicators, and indeed some of the economic reforms have been exclusively concerned with changes in the indicator system. Figure 4.1 taken from a Soviet textbook on economic planning gives a general overview of the organization in the Soviet Union without a course of any claims of completeness. The diagram shows the formal organizational structure, but actual decision-making in planning issues probably takes place primarily at the highest levels. Proposals for change presented by the lower levels usually concern less important aspects of the plan. The party agencies also have been left out of the diagram, although it may be taken as given that the overriding decisions on, for instance, the 5-year plans are taken by the Central Party authorities. The Party Congress ratifies plan proposals, after which formal decisions are taken in the Soviets at various levels. Basically, central planning still existed. It was mostly done by the state / from above, but enterprises, directors, managers, and associations could also make proposals and give them to the state, which usually were about small aspects of the plan. Essentially, the directors and managers couldn't do anything without state approval. To further prove this, let me show you that associations were supervised by the state and were subordinate to the state, to quote the book again. Thus, various types of organization are possible depending on the particular sectoral structure, and the following principal types may be distinguished. 1. Two-level organization. Industrial associations are subordinate to an all-union or republic ministry. Combines and smaller enterprises may also be directly subordinate to ministries. 2. Three-level organization. Industrial associations are subordinate to an all-union concern, which is accountable to an all-union ministry. Alternatively, an industrial association may be subordinate to a republic association or a republic ministry. Combines and enterprises may also be included in this type of organization. As I said before, this was a very left-wing and extremist reform which would have centralized the economy further had the 1973 constitution reforms been fully implemented. A big reason behind it is that the Gospan and the Central Committee would have gotten even more power. To quote the book from before again, thus, if the new structure had been fully built up, the position of the central political leadership and of Gospan would have been strengthened considerably relative to that of the ministries. Furthermore, to prove that this reform further centralized the economy, let's quote the second book about the 1973 Kosygin reforms, which I promise to quote. In general, local party organs relied on a network of Soviets and their administrative agencies to monitor the work of local industry and services and to supervise regional planning. Party leadership, руководство of the Soviets, was direct and intimate, and career transfers between Soviet and party positions at local level were common. Local party and Soviet officials usually operated as parts of a single entity, constituting the local powers, местные власти. Prior to 1990, there were no published cases of Soviets clashing with party officials in an attempt to assert their independence, except in corruption cases. Basically, the regional and local planning organs more or less lost their power and relevance, and the party and state basically took complete control over the local and regional planning organs and over the enterprises and associations. Let's quote the book again to prove this even further. The associations violated the party's territorial principle in that it was impossible, often impossible, to unite the factory PPOs under a single territorial party organ. There was no agreement on to what extent the party structure should be adapted to parallel the association structure. In the end, three alternative models were approved: a fully unified PPO for each association, a hybrid model relying on periodic meetings of PPO secretaries to coordinate their work, and a system where each subsidiary plant had its own PPO, possibly under different Raikom or Obkom. Each association's party organization could decide the structure most appropriate to that firm's degree of geographical dispersion and economic autonomy. By 1977, there were 689 unified PPOs, 516 hybrids, and 1,800 independent PPOs. Whatever the structure adopted, the work of party organs was more complicated than before. Initially, the party leadership seemed to favor the unified model. The Gorky automobile plant was used by the Central Committee of the CPSU as the model example of a unified PPO, covering 12,500 communists in 6 different plants. However, the Gorky plants were are located in the same city. It was much harder to make the unified PPO work where subsidiaries were dispersed over a wide geographic area. The association's reform disrupted the traditional allocation of responsibilities between territorial and industrial agencies within the CPSU. The party organizations of subsidiaries often found their loyalties divided between the factory and geographical superiors. Some subsidiary PPOs completely lost touch with the local Raikom, and the loss of a large and active factory party organization up to one half of Raikom's total membership perhaps could have a serious impact on the Raikom's ability to function effectively. Before we continue, we need to clear up some stuff. I want to first explain what PPOs, Raikom and Obkom are. According to Wikipedia, PPOs were extremely small party cells. They were at the very bottom of the structure of the CPSU and were kind of local planning organs. There were different types of them. Independent ones with maybe 3 or 4 or 5 communists in an individual cell. Unified ones which covered thousands of communists in various different cells. And hybrid ones, which were a mix of both. Raicoms were district party branches, and Obcoms were regional party cells at an oblast level. They were local and regional planning organs. Now, to summarize, because this was a very weird reform, they more or less lost power and were completely overtaken by the Central Committee and the actual party, as noted 3 minutes ago, with the Gospan also raising its role severely, as noted. This was extreme centralization. Let's quote the book to talk about this very radical centralization. Party officials were reluctant to see local plans turned into subsidiaries, since their output would no longer count towards oblast or republic output figures, and there were complaints that party organs were not consulted before reorganizations were carried out. Basically, a lot of local enterprises turned into subsidiaries, and this was something that annoyed party officials, as you know. This made it harder to plan the economy, something which we will cover in a minute, and made making statistics hard. On top of that, this reform also caused a lot of corruption, as can be seen by the complaints. Let's continue reading this book. By 1981, roughly half of all Soviet industry measured by manpower and by share of output was administered through associations, of which there were 4,150 with an average of 4 enterprises. Each 39 member enterprises might be scattered over different rayons oblasts, or even republics, making it more difficult for Gospan to monitor locational policy and more difficult for local party and Soviet officials to keep track of industrial policy. Where the head enterprise of the trust was located within a given oblast, relations could proceed roughly as before. However, disputes arose between regional political organs and the local subsidiaries, filiale, of associations based elsewhere. Basically, enterprises of associations were scattered all over the USSR, and this made it difficult to plan them. If the head enterprise of an association, basically a subsidiary, was located at a specific oblast or region, then everything stayed the same, and this made communication way easier as well. There were also a lot of disputes between subsidiaries of associations and regional planning organs, causing a lot of corruption. It's like how there were disputes between the various economic regions in the USSR, aka Sovnarkhozy under Khrushchev. For more on the Sovnarkhozy, watch episode 5 of my Post-Stalin USSR series. Link will be in the description. Let's further talk about corruption. Apart from subsidiaries being snubbed by associations, there were also complaints in the opposite direction, where local party and Soviet organs refused to help with housing and services if they belonged to alien, чужой enterprises, for example, headquartered in another district. It is difficult to judge whether the restructuring which followed the associations reform made sense from the point of view of economic efficiency. It may have promoted specialization, but sometimes led to expensive transshipments of semi-finished goods. The reform provided an opportunity for departmental interests to consolidate their position at the expense of local authorities, with the existing regional power centers, Lvov and Kiev, in the above examples, are also strengthening themselves in relation to weaker provinces. I'm not sure if this is really corruption, but basically, local planning bodies refuse to plan enterprises from other regions. So let's say an enterprise is located in Moscow, right, and it's asking the Petersburgian local planning bodies for help. Then, in some cases, the Petersburgian authorities didn't help because the enterprise isn't in St. Petersburg. The regional planning organs also got more powerful than district ones thanks to the reform, and this reform was a failure because of, corruption and because it was inefficient. It made planning less rational and less specialized, meaning that resources often weren't effectively used really, a problem that had been fought since the Stalin era, and sometimes products were created that weren't even necessary and that the plan didn't demand. I'd also like to finally talk about subsidiaries. What are subsidiaries? Well, according to the book from before, there were three ways to form associations. One way was through directly turning large enterprises into associations. The other was through combining a bunch of small enterprises into one association, and one more was by making a large head enterprise incorporate a lot of smaller enterprises. Like, for example, let's say there is an IKEA, right? It's a large shop, but it can have a lot of small enterprises inside of it. Like, I don't know, McDonald's, yet IKEA still keeps being the head enterprise. This is basically a subsidiary, a large enterprise with a lot of small enterprises, which often manages small enterprises in some shape or form. I think that doing this was great. Remember how I said that Khrushchev nationalized all these small market leftovers and all small private businesses from the Stalin era in episode 5. It's kind of hard and inefficient to plan 100,000 small individual and barely relevant enterprises. So I think that it would be way better if we would merge, like, I don't know, 20, 50 or 100 small enterprises into an association, as this makes planning easier then and more efficient in my opinion. Sadly, according to the other book though, sometimes the head enterprises of associations were ignored by associations, which is partially why the reform failed. Also, I'd like to address that Stalin supported, or at least would have supported, associations. The proof to that is that Stalin supported the socialist concentration of production, something what the 1973 Kosygin reforms did. To quote Stalin, "Our superiority lies in the fact that we have no crises of overproduction, we have not and never will have millions of unemployed, we have no anarchy in production, for we are conducting a planned economy, but it is not all. We are a land of the most concentrated industry. This means that we can can build our industry on the basis of the best technique and thereby secure an unprecedented productivity of labor and unprecedented rate of accumulation. Our weakness in the past was that this industry was based upon scattered and small peasant farming. That was so in the past, it is no longer so now. Soon, perhaps within a year, we shall become the country of the largest scale agriculture in the world. This year, the state farms and collective farms, and these are forms of large scale farming, have already supplied half of all our marketable grain. And that means that our system, the Soviet system, affords us opportunities of rapid progress of which not a single bourgeois country can dream. Joseph Stalin. Also, I'd like to now address the one-person leadership principle, okay? So, this is not revisionist, okay? It's just when a single manager implements plans. I don't see the problem. Okay, but he's still limited, as it says. He can't exploit our enemy. He can't fire people, and so on. I'd like to show you a quote by Lenin, where Lenin supports this principle. To quote the great Soviet encyclopedia, the effective implementation of the principle of one-man management presupposes a comprehensive examination and analysis of the conditions under which a particular decision must be made and of the goals facing the collective. It also presupposes the combining of the interests of each collective with the interests of the national economy as a whole. Socialist production relations have created objective prerequisites for the extensive participation of workers in the management of the national economy, participation that is organically combined with the principle of one-man management. Concerning this question, Lenin wrote, "We must learn how to combine the public meeting democracy of the working people, turbulent, surging, overflowing its banks like a spring flood, with iron discipline while at work, with the unquestioning obedience to the will of a single person, the Soviet leader, while at work." Lenin was talking about socialism in that quote. Lastly, I'd like to address the fact that there was no stagnation under the Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev, to quote Andropov in 1964. We are proud of the fact that during the past 10 years the per capita industrial output in the Soviet Union has grown by 128%, while the United States registered an increase of only 15%. Yuri Andropov, collected works of Yuri Andropov, page 64. In conclusion, the Soviet industrial output was catching up very well with the US. Or gas wasn't abolished, and the core of it was implemented by 1985, along with cyber planning in input and output. Or gas would have been fully implemented by the year 2000, and in 1973 Kosygin reforms were extremely left-wing and centralized the economy even more and gave the Gospan and the Central Committee even more power. Sources are in the pinned comment of the Ой, блин. Sources are in the pinned comment of the comment section.